Madison Clark had always believed the world revolved around her. At 22, she was the daughter of a successful tech entrepreneur who had spoiled her beyond measure. Her designer clothes, luxury car, and platinum credit card were just the beginning of her entitled lifestyle. She had never been told no and expected everyone to treat her like royalty. On a crisp autumn morning in London, Madison decided to visit Buckingham Palace. She had flown in from New York the previous day, staying at the most expensive hotel in the city. Her father had connections everywhere, and she was used to getting special treatment wherever she went. The palace tour was just another item on her list of things to check off during her European vacation. Madison arrived at the palace gates wearing a bright pink designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her high heels clicked loudly on the pavement as she approached the entrance. She expected to walk right through like she did at exclusive clubs and restaurants back home. The sight of the stoic royal guards in their traditional red uniforms and tall black hats made her roll her eyes. "Excuse me," she called out loudly to one of the guards, completely ignoring the proper tour entrance. "I need to get inside right now. My father is very important and I don't have time to wait in those ridiculous lines with all those tourists." The guard, whose name was James Thompson, had been serving for 8 years. He had seen all types of people during his duty, but something about Madison's demanding tone immediately caught his attention. He remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead as he had been trained to do. The royal guards were famous for their discipline and inability to be distracted, no matter what happened around them. Madison stepped closer, waving her hand in front of his face. "Hello? Are you listening to me? I'm talking to you." She pulled out her phone and started taking selfies with the motionless guard. Making faces and posing dramatically, other tourists began to gather around, some taking pictures of the scene. "This is ridiculous," Madison announced loudly. "In America, people actually do their jobs and help customers. I'm going to call my father and have you fired." She dialed a number on her phone, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Daddy? Yes, I'm at the palace and this guard is being incredibly rude. He won't even acknowledge me." James remained completely still, but inside he was amazed by her behavior. In all his years of service, he had never encountered someone quite so demanding and self-centered. He had been trained to ignore distractions, but Madison was testing his limits in ways he had never experienced before. The crowd of tourists grew larger as Madison's voice became louder and more dramatic. She began telling everyone around her about her family's wealth and connections. "My father owns 3 companies and has friends in the government," she declared. "This guard has no idea who he's dealing with." A senior palace official noticed the commotion and approached the scene. Madison immediately turned her attention to him, assuming he would solve her problem. "Finally, someone with authority," she said with satisfaction. "I need this guard disciplined immediately. He's been ignoring me for the past 10 minutes. The official, Mr. Williams, had worked at the palace for over 20 years. He had dealt with difficult visitors before, but Madison's attitude was particularly challenging. "Miss, I'm afraid you need to follow the proper procedures for palace tours. The guards are not permitted to break their positions during their duty." Madison's face turned red with anger. "Procedures? Do you know who I am? My father could buy this entire palace if he wanted to. I don't follow procedures. Procedures follow me." She pointed dramatically at James, who continued to stand, perfectly still. "And this guard has been incredibly disrespectful." The crowd was now taking videos of Madison's outburst. Some people were laughing, while others looked embarrassed for her. Children pointed and whispered to their parents about the angry lady. Madison was completely oblivious to how she appeared to others, convinced that she was the victim of poor service. Mr. Williams tried to maintain his professional composure. "Miss, I understand you're frustrated, but the royal guards have very specific duties. They cannot engage with visitors during their watch. If you'd like to tour the palace, I can direct you to the proper entrance." "I don't want a tour with common people," Madison snapped back. "I want a private tour, and I want it now. And I want this guard to apologize to me personally." She stepped even closer to James, who remained as still as a statue. The situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable for everyone involved. Other tourists were starting to complain about the disruption, and security personnel were beginning to take notice. Madison's behavior was drawing exactly the wrong kind of attention, but she was too caught up in her own drama to realize it. James had been trained for situations like this, but Madison's persistence was unlike anything in his experience. She began walking in circles around him, taking more photos and making comments about his appearance. "Maybe he's deaf," she said loudly, "or maybe he just doesn't speak English properly." As the minutes passed, Madison's behavior became more erratic. She started making exaggerated gestures and speaking in an artificially loud voice. The crowd around them grew larger, with people pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Social media posts were already beginning to appear, though Madison had no idea she was becoming an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. The autumn sun was getting higher, and James could feel sweat beginning to form under his heavy uniform, but he maintained his position perfectly. Years of training had prepared him for exactly this type of test, though he had never imagined it would come from a spoiled American tourist who seemed to have no understanding of basic respect or protocol. Madison finally noticed all the phones pointed in her direction, but instead of being embarrassed, she seemed to enjoy the attention. "Good," she declared loudly. "I want everyone to see how poorly visitors are treated here. This is going to be all over the internet, and this guard's career will be over." What Madison didn't know was that her confrontation with the Royal Guard was about to take a turn that would change everything she thought she knew about respect, humility, and the consequences of her actions. The crowd around Madison and the Royal Guard had grown to over 50 people, all watching the spectacle unfold. Videos were already being uploaded to social media platforms with captions like "Entitled American Tourist versus British Royal Guard" and "Karen meets her match at Buckingham Palace." Madison remained completely unaware that she was becoming famous for all the wrong reasons. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell happened to be walking past the palace gates during her lunch break when she noticed the commotion. As a member of the Metropolitan Police with 15 years of experience, she had seen her share of difficult situations, but something about this scene caught her professional attention. She decided to observe from a distance to see how the situation would develop. Madison had now been yelling at James for nearly 20 minutes, and her voice was getting hoarse. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she declared to anyone who would listen. "In my country, we fire people for this kind of behavior. This guard is clearly incompetent and probably not even qualified for his job." An elderly British gentleman in the crowd couldn't contain himself any longer. "Miss, perhaps you don't understand," he said politely. "These guards are highly trained soldiers. They're not tour guides or customer service representatives. They're protecting the crown." Madison spun around to face the man, her designer handbag swinging dramatically. "I don't care what they're supposed to be protecting. I'm a paying tourist and I deserve respect. My tax dollars probably pay his salary anyway." The crowd murmured at this comment, with several people shaking their heads in disbelief. "Actually, miss," another voice called out, "you're in Britain now. Your tax dollars don't pay for anything here." This comment brought some scattered laughter from the crowd, which only made Madison angrier. Detective Inspector Mitchell moved closer to get a better view of the situation. She could see that James was maintaining perfect composure despite the intense provocation. His training was clearly excellent, and she found herself impressed by his self-control. She had worked with many officers who would have struggled to remain so professional under such circumstances. Madison decided to try a different approach. She opened her expensive purse and pulled out a thick roll of cash. "Look, I don't want to cause problems," she said in a suddenly sweet voice. "I just want to take a few photos inside the palace. Surely we can work something out." She held up several $100 bills toward James. The crowd gasped at this blatant attempt at bribery. Even the tourists from other countries recognized that trying to bribe a royal guard was completely inappropriate. James continued to stare straight ahead, not even glancing at the money, but Detective Inspector Mitchell noticed his jaw tighten slightly. Mr. Williams, the palace official, stepped forward immediately. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to put that away right now. What you're doing is completely inappropriate and could be considered a criminal offense." Madison's fake sweetness disappeared instantly. Criminal offense for offering a tip? You people are absolutely crazy. She stuffed the money back into her purse but continued to wave it around dramatically. I'm trying to be generous here, and you're treating me like a criminal. A young mother with 2 small children pushed through the crowd. Excuse me, she said firmly to Madison. My children are watching this and your behavior is completely unacceptable. Could you please lower your voice and show some respect? Madison turned her fury on the woman. Don't tell me how to behave. Maybe you should teach your children not to stare at adults having conversations. The mother's face reddened, and several people in the crowd began to voice their disapproval of Madison's response. Detective Inspector Mitchell decided she had seen enough. She approached the scene with her identification ready, though she remained in casual clothes. Excuse me, miss, she said calmly to Madison. I'm Detective Inspector Mitchell with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you for a moment. Madison's eyes widened, but instead of being concerned, she seemed excited. Finally, someone in charge. Officer, I need to file a complaint against this guard and probably this entire organization. I've been treated absolutely terribly, and I want something done about it. Actually, Detective Inspector Mitchell replied calmly, I've been observing the situation for several minutes and I'm more concerned about your behavior than anyone else's. Attempting to bribe a royal guard is a serious matter. Bribe? Madison laughed loudly. I was offering a tip for good service, though obviously that's not applicable here since the service has been terrible. She gestured dramatically toward James, who continued to maintain his position perfectly. Detective Inspector Mitchell had dealt with entitled individuals before, but Madison's complete lack of self-awareness was remarkable. Miss, I need to see some identification and I need you to step away from the guard immediately. Madison reached into her purse and pulled out her American passport with obvious pride. Madison Clark from New York City. My father is Richard Clark of Clark Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of him? She held the passport like it was a VIP pass that would solve all her problems. Miss Clark, Detective Inspector Mitchell said after examining the document. Being American doesn't give you special privileges here, and neither does your father's business success. You need to understand that your behavior is causing a public disturbance. Public disturbance? Madison's voice reached a new pitch. I'm the one being disturbed here. This guard has been ignoring me for over 20 minutes, and now you're taking his side too. This is discrimination against Americans. The crowd was now completely engaged in the drama unfolding before them. People were taking turns explaining British customs to their friends and family, while others were providing live commentary on social media. Madison had become an unwitting star of dozens of live streams and video posts. James had been standing in the same position for over half an hour now, but his training allowed him to remain perfectly composed. Detective Inspector Mitchell noticed his remarkable discipline and made a mental note to commend his performance to his superiors later. Madison suddenly had what she thought was a brilliant idea. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this entire operation. I want to file an official complaint, and I want compensation for the terrible treatment I've received today. She pulled out her phone again. I'm calling the American Embassy right now. They'll sort this out immediately. Detective Inspector Mitchell watched as Madison dialed a number and began speaking loudly into her phone. Hello, this is Madison Clark, American citizen. I'm being harassed by British police and ignored by palace guards. I need immediate assistance at Buckingham Palace. What Madison didn't realize was that her situation was about to become much more complicated. The videos of her behavior were already going viral online, and Detective Inspector Mitchell was beginning to consider whether formal charges might be necessary. The royal guard she had been tormenting was about to reveal something that would change her entire perspective on respect, duty, and honor. The American embassy official on the phone listened politely to Madison's dramatic retelling of events before responding in a calm, professional tone. Miss Clark, I understand you're frustrated, but based on your description, it sounds like you may have misunderstood British customs regarding the royal guard. They are not permitted to interact with tourists during their duty. Madison's face turned bright red as she realized the embassy wasn't going to immediately rescue her from the situation. But they're being completely unreasonable, she protested into the phone. I just wanted some basic courtesy and maybe a few photos. Is that too much to ask? Detective Inspector Mitchell could hear both sides of the phone conversation and watched as Madison's confidence began to waver for the first time. The embassy official continued explaining proper protocols for visiting royal sites, but Madison kept interrupting with complaints about unfair treatment. During this phone call, something unexpected happened. A black sedan with government plates pulled up to the palace gates, and a distinguished older man in a military uniform stepped out. Colonel William Hartley, the commanding officer of the Queen's Guard, had been informed about the disturbance and decided to assess the situation personally. Colonel Hartley surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. He saw the large crowd, the obvious tension, and Detective Inspector Mitchell managing what appeared to be a difficult tourist situation. But his primary focus was on James, who had maintained perfect composure throughout the entire ordeal. The colonel felt a surge of professional pride watching one of his guards perform his duties flawlessly under such challenging circumstances. Madison finished her frustrating phone call and immediately noticed the arrival of the military officer. Her entitled mindset kicked in again, and she assumed this was someone who could finally solve her problems. "Excuse me, officer," she called out loudly, pushing past several tourists to get closer to Colonel Hartley. "Are you in charge here? Because I need to file a serious complaint." Colonel Hartley was a man who had served his country for over 30 years, including deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had earned numerous commendations for bravery and leadership. His presence commanded immediate respect from everyone around him, everyone except Madison, who seemed oblivious to his rank and bearing. "Young lady," Colonel Hartley said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "I am Colonel Hartley, and I command the guards at this palace. I've been informed that you've been causing a disturbance for over an hour now." Madison's eyes lit up with what she thought was vindication. Finally, someone who understands proper customer service. "Colonel, this guard has been completely ignoring me, and I've been treated terribly by everyone here. I demand an apology and compensation for this awful experience." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the tourists who didn't speak English could sense that something significant was about to happen. Detective Inspector Mitchell positioned herself where she could observe both Madison and Colonel Hartley, curious to see how this military leader would handle such an unusual situation. Colonel Hartley studied Madison for a long moment, taking in her expensive clothes, her entitled posture, and her complete lack of awareness about appropriate behavior. Then he looked at James, who continued to maintain his position with perfect military bearing despite having endured over an hour of harassment. "Miss," Colonel Hartley said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of his authority, "let me explain something to you about the young man you've been insulting for the past hour." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. Madison crossed her arms, expecting to hear an apology and explanation about poor training or inadequate service standards. She had no idea that she was about to learn something that would shock everyone present, including herself. "This guard, Lance Corporal Thompson, is not just a ceremonial figure standing here for tourists to photograph," Colonel Hartley continued. "He is a decorated combat veteran who served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He has been awarded the Military Cross for exceptional bravery under fire." Madison's confident expression began to falter as she processed this information. The crowd murmured, with surprise and newfound respect. Many people began looking at James with completely different eyes, realizing they had been witnessing not just professional discipline, but the composure of a genuine war hero. Furthermore, Colonel Hartley continued, his voice growing stronger, "Lance Corporal Thompson once risked his own life to save 4 wounded soldiers from a burning vehicle during a Taliban attack. He spent 6 weeks in a military hospital recovering from his injuries, and when he was offered a comfortable desk job, he volunteered to return to active duty." The silence was now complete. Even Madison seemed stunned by this revelation. She had spent over an hour treating a decorated war hero like a servant who existed solely for her convenience. The weight of this realization was beginning to show on her face. Detective Inspector Mitchell found herself deeply moved by Colonel Hartley's words. She had suspected that James was no ordinary guard based on his exceptional composure, but learning about his military service and heroism added a new dimension to her respect for his professionalism. "The discipline you've witnessed here today," Colonel Hartley continued, looking directly at Madison, "is not just ceremonial training. It's the same mental toughness that allowed Lance Corporal Thompson to maintain his position under enemy fire while coordinating the evacuation of wounded soldiers. Standing perfectly still while you insult him is hardly a challenge compared to what he's endured in service to his country." Madison opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely speechless. The magnitude of her behavior was finally beginning to sink in, and she could feel hundreds of eyes judging her actions with new understanding. Colonel Hartley wasn't finished. "Young lady, you've spent this entire time demanding respect, while showing absolutely none to a man who has earned more respect in a single day of combat than most people earn in a lifetime. You've embarrassed yourself, your country, and everyone who has had the misfortune to witness your behavior today." The crowd began to applaud Colonel Hartley's words, and several people shouted expressions of support for James. Madison looked around frantically, finally realizing that she was completely alone in her position and that everyone present viewed her as the problem, not the solution. But Colonel Hartley had one more revelation that would leave everyone, including Madison, absolutely stunned. What he was about to share would transform this embarrassing incident into something that would be remembered and talked about for years to come. Colonel Hartley paused for a moment, allowing his previous words to sink in before continuing. The crowd remained completely silent, hanging on every word. Madison stood frozen, her earlier confidence completely shattered by the revelation of James's military heroics. "There's something else you should know about Lance Corporal Thompson," Colonel Hartley said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. 3 months ago, he was personally commended by Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for his service. He was one of only 12 soldiers that year to receive a personal audience with the Queen. The crowd gasped in amazement. Even Detective Inspector Mitchell felt her eyebrows raise in surprise. A personal commendation from the Queen was an extraordinarily rare honor, reserved for only the most exceptional acts of service and bravery. Madison's face had gone completely pale. She was beginning to understand that she hadn't just been harassing any ordinary guard. She had been insulting someone who represented the very highest standards of British military service and honor. But that's still not the most remarkable thing about this young man, Colonel Hartley continued, and Madison felt her stomach drop, wondering what else she was about to learn. "You see, Lance Corporal Thompson's actions in Afghanistan didn't just save the lives of 4 British soldiers. One of those soldiers was Lieutenant Charles Windsor." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. Several people began looking between James and Colonel Hartley, trying to process what they had just heard. Madison looked confused, not immediately recognizing the significance of the name. "Lieutenant Charles Windsor," Colonel Hartley repeated slowly, "who is now known to the world as Prince William, the Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne." The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Cell phones appeared immediately as people began frantically searching for information and sharing the incredible news. Madison's mouth fell open as the full weight of what she had just learned crashed over her. Detective Inspector Mitchell felt a chill run down her spine. She had been observing what she thought was just another entitled tourist incident, but she had actually witnessed someone spending over an hour insulting a man who had personally saved the life of the future King of England. Lance Corporal Thompson's actions that day, Colonel Hartley continued, prevented what could have been a national tragedy. The armored vehicle carrying Prince William's unit had hit an improvised explosive device. The vehicle was on fire, enemy forces were closing in, and several soldiers were trapped inside. Without regard for his own safety, Lance Corporal Thompson coordinated the rescue operation that saved all 4 men, including our future king. Madison felt dizzy as she processed this information. She had spent the entire morning treating a genuine national hero like he was beneath her notice. The man she had been demanding apologize to her had literally saved the life of British royalty. The crowd was now completely captivated by Colonel Hartley's account. Many people were taking videos, but their attitude had completely changed from entertainment to reverence. They were witnessing something extraordinary, the revelation of a true hero's identity. Prince William personally requested that Lance, Corporal Thompson, be assigned to the Queen's Guard as a mark of the highest respect, Colonel Hartley explained. He said, and I quote, "I owe my life to this man's courage and quick thinking. I can think of no higher honor than having him protect the crown." Madison began to feel physically sick. She looked at James, who continued to maintain his perfect posture despite being the center of this incredible revelation. She realized that she had been in the presence of someone truly exceptional and had completely failed to recognize it. Detective Inspector Mitchell stepped forward, feeling compelled to speak. "Colonel Hartley, I've been observing this situation for over an hour, and I have to say that Lance Corporal Thompson's composure and professionalism have been absolutely remarkable. Even under the most trying circumstances, he has maintained perfect discipline." "That doesn't surprise me in the least," Colonel Hartley replied with obvious pride. "When you've maintained your position under Taliban gunfire while organizing a rescue operation, dealing with a difficult tourist is relatively straightforward." Madison finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I didn't know," she stammered. "Nobody told me he was... I thought he was just what?" Colonel Hartley asked firmly. "Just a person doing his job who deserved basic respect and courtesy." "You're absolutely right, that should have been enough." The crowd began to applaud again, this time specifically for James, who continued to look straight ahead, but whose eyes seemed to show just the slightest hint of acknowledgement. Madison realized that hundreds of people were now looking at her with complete disapproval and disgust. Colonel Hartley wasn't finished with his revelations. "There's one more thing you should understand, Miss Clark. The reason Lance Corporal Thompson didn't respond to your demands, insults, or attempted bribery isn't just because of military protocol. It's because he has taken a sacred oath to protect the crown with his life. Every moment he stands at his post, he is prepared to face any threat, up to and including giving his life for his duty." Madison felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, as the full magnitude of her behavior became clear. She had spent over an hour trying to corrupt and humiliate someone whose integrity and honor were absolute. She had completely misunderstood not just the situation, but the character of the person she was dealing with. Detective Inspector Mitchell noticed Madison's emotional state and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Justice was being served, but she could see that Madison was finally beginning to understand the severity of her actions. The crowd had grown to over 200 people, many of whom were now taking photos of James with newfound respect and admiration. Social media posts were being updated to reflect the incredible story they had just witnessed. Madison's earlier videos were being shared with new context about the hero she had been harassing. Colonel Hartley looked at Madison with stern but not unkind eyes. "Miss Clark, you came here today expecting special treatment because of your father's wealth and your American citizenship, but you've encountered someone who represents the very best of what it means to serve others with honor, courage, and selflessness. I hope you've learned something valuable from this experience." Madison nodded weakly, unable to speak. She was beginning to realize that this incident would follow her for the rest of her life, and that her behavior had been recorded and shared around the world. But more importantly, she was starting to understand that she had been in the presence of true greatness and had failed to recognize it. What Madison didn't know was that Colonel Hartley had one final surprise that would complete her transformation from entitled tourist to someone who would never forget the lesson she learned that day at Buckingham Palace. Colonel Hartley reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out his phone. The crowd watched in fascination as he scrolled through his contacts and selected a number. Madison watched nervously, wondering who he could possibly be calling and what additional consequences might be coming her way. "Sir, this is Colonel Hartley at Buckingham Palace," he said into the phone. "I'm here with Lance Corporal Thompson, and I think you might be interested in a situation that's developed." There was a pause as he listened to the response. "Yes, sir. The young man who saved your life is currently on duty, and he's just demonstrated exactly why you recommended him for the Queen's Guard." Madison's eyes widened as she realized who Colonel Hartley was speaking with. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Detective Inspector Mitchell found herself holding her breath, amazed at how this incident continued to develop in unexpected ways. He's been standing at his post for over 2 hours while being harassed by a tourist, sir. He hasn't moved a muscle or said a word. His discipline has been absolutely perfect. Colonel Hartley listened for another moment, then smiled. Yes, sir. I think that would be very appropriate. Colonel Hartley ended the call and looked at Madison, whose face had gone completely white. Miss Clark, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales would like to meet you personally. He's currently at Clarence House, which is less than a mile from here. He'll be arriving in approximately 15 minutes. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. People were calling friends and family, sharing the incredible news that Prince William himself was coming to witness the aftermath of Madison's confrontation with the man who had saved his life. Madison felt like she might faint from the overwhelming realization of what was happening. Detective Inspector Mitchell stepped closer to Madison, concerned about her condition. Miss Clark, are you all right? You look very pale. Madison could only nod weakly, unable to form words as she contemplated meeting the future King of England under these circumstances. I think, Colonel Hartley said kindly but firmly, this would be an excellent opportunity for you to offer a proper apology to Lance Corporal Thompson before His Royal Highness arrives. You have about 10 minutes to consider what you'd like to say to the man who saved our future king's life. Madison looked at James, who continued to maintain his perfect military bearing despite everything that had happened. For the first time, she really looked at him as a person rather than an obstacle to her desires. She could see the strength in his posture, the discipline in his gaze, and the quiet dignity that had allowed him to endure her behavior without complaint. I don't know what to say, Madison whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I've been so awful. I treated him like he was nothing, and he's actually a hero. He saved the prince's life, and I was trying to get him fired, and he— Elderly woman from the crowd stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Madison's shoulder. Dear, the fact that you're upset shows you understand now. That's the first step. Just speak from your heart and tell him you're sorry. Madison wiped her eyes and took a shaky step toward James. The crowd fell silent, giving her space for this crucial moment. Lance Corporal Thompson, she began, her voice trembling. I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I was rude, entitled, and completely wrong. You're a hero who saved the prince's life, and I treated you terribly. James remained at attention, but Detective Inspector Mitchell noticed the slightest softening around his eyes. He was clearly listening, even though his training prevented him from responding. I'm ashamed of my behavior, Madison continued, her voice growing stronger. You were just doing your job, protecting people and serving your country, and I made it about me and my stupid demands. I'm sorry for trying to bribe you, for insulting you, and for not showing you the respect you deserve. The crowd began to applaud softly, appreciating Madison's genuine remorse. Colonel Hartley nodded approvingly, seeing that his approach was having the intended effect. Madison had clearly learned something important about respect, service, and humility. A few minutes later, a convoy of black vehicles pulled up to the palace gates. Several security personnel emerged first, followed by a tall, familiar figure in a casual but elegant outfit. Prince William had arrived, and the crowd fell into a respectful hush. Prince William approached the scene with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to public appearances, but his eyes immediately focused on James with obvious warmth and respect. Lance Corporal Thompson, he said with genuine pleasure. Colonel Hartley tells me you've been demonstrating exceptional discipline today. For the first time in over 2 hours, James was permitted to break his position. He snapped to attention and saluted sharply. Your Royal Highness, he said in a clear, strong voice. The crowd was thrilled to finally hear him speak. At ease, Lance Corporal, Prince William said with a smile. I understand there was some confusion about your role here today. He looked around at the crowd and then focused on Madison, who was standing frozen with nervousness. You must be Miss Clark, Prince William said, approaching her with diplomatic grace. I'm told you've learned some interesting things about Lance Corporal Thompson this afternoon. Madison managed a shaky curtsy, having no idea if it was appropriate, but wanting to show respect. "Your Royal Highness, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was completely wrong about everything." Prince William's expression was kind but serious. "Miss Clark, what you didn't know was that James Thompson is one of the finest soldiers I've ever served with. When our convoy was attacked in Afghanistan, he organized our rescue while under heavy enemy fire. Without his courage and quick thinking, several of us wouldn't have made it home." Madison felt fresh tears starting as she heard the story directly from Prince William himself. The man she had spent hours insulting had literally saved the life of the future King of England. And now, she was hearing about it from that king himself. "I wanted to come here today," Prince William continued. "Not just to see James, but to meet you personally, because I think you've learned something important about making assumptions about people based on appearances." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. This was turning into something none of them would ever forget. A real-life lesson in respect, honor, and the importance of recognizing true worth in others. Prince William looked at James with obvious affection and respect. "This man asked for nothing in return for saving my life. He refused personal recognition and requested only to continue serving his country. That's the kind of character we should all aspire to have." Madison nodded through her tears, finally, understanding the full magnitude of what she had encountered. She was about to receive one final lesson that would ensure she never forgot this day or the man who had taught her the true meaning of dignity and service. Prince William turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll remember what you've witnessed here today. Lance Corporal Thompson represents the very best of military service, courage, discipline, and selfless dedication to duty. He has never asked for recognition or special treatment. He simply does his job with honor." The crowd applauded enthusiastically, many people wiping away tears, as they fully understood the significance of what they had witnessed. Madison stood among them, transformed by the experience from an entitled young woman into someone who finally understood the difference between true worth and superficial status. Prince William then did something completely unexpected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, elegant box. "James," he said, using the Lance Corporal's first name, "I've been carrying this with me, waiting for the right moment. Today seems perfect." James looked surprised for the first time since the entire incident began. Even his military composure couldn't hide his curiosity about what Prince William was about to present. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something historic was about to happen. "Lance Corporal Thompson," Prince William announced formally, "by the authority vested in me by His Majesty the King, I am honored to present you with the Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration for valor, in the face of the enemy." He opened the box to reveal the distinctive bronze cross that represents the ultimate recognition of military bravery. The crowd gasped in amazement. The Victoria Cross was legendary. Only one 358 had ever been awarded since its creation in 1856. James was visibly moved, his eyes showing emotion for the first time during the entire encounter. Even his exceptional military discipline couldn't completely hide his reaction to receiving such an extraordinary honor. Madison felt her knees go weak as she realized she had spent hours insulting someone who was about to receive the highest military honor in the British system. She had demanded apologies from a man who was about to be recognized as one of the greatest heroes in modern military history. The citation reads, Prince William continued, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty when, under heavy enemy fire and at great personal risk, he organized and led the successful rescue of 4 wounded soldiers from a burning armored vehicle, preventing what would have been a catastrophic loss of life." Detective Inspector Mitchell found herself deeply moved by the ceremony unfolding before her. In all her years of police work, she had never witnessed anything quite so powerful. The contrast between Madison's earlier behavior and this moment of recognition was striking and unforgettable. James stepped forward and accepted the decoration with perfect military bearing, but Madison could see tears in his eyes. "Your Royal Highness," he said in a voice thick with emotion. "I was simply doing my duty. My fellow soldiers would have done the same for me." "That's exactly why you deserve this honor," Prince William replied warmly. "True heroes never seek recognition. They simply do what's right because it's right. You embody everything we hope for in those who serve our nation." The crowd erupted in sustained applause that lasted several minutes. People were crying, cheering, and sharing the moment with friends and family through their phones. Madison stood, in the middle of it all, completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had witnessed and participated in. Prince William then turned his attention back to Madison, who was still struggling to process everything that had happened. "Miss Clark, I hope today has been educational for you. James Thompson is exactly the kind of person who makes our country strong, not because of wealth or status, but because of character and service." Madison nodded vigorously, unable to trust her voice. She had learned more about respect, humility, and true worth in the past few hours than she had in her entire privileged life. The experience had fundamentally changed her understanding of what made a person valuable. "I'd like to ask you a favor," Prince William continued kindly. "When you return to America, I hope you'll share this story, not to embarrass yourself but to help others understand that real heroes often wear uniforms and serve quietly without seeking attention or praise." "I will, Your Royal Highness," Madison managed to say through her tears. "I promise I will, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what an incredible person Lance Corporal Thompson is." As the ceremony concluded, people began approaching James to shake his hand and offer congratulations. Madison waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching him one final time. The man who had endured her harassment with such dignity was now wearing Britain's highest military honor. "Lance Corporal Thompson," she said quietly. "I know I already apologized, but I need to say this again. You're everything I should aspire to be. Honorable, dignified, and selfless. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of having met someone like you." James looked at her with kindness in his eyes. "Miss Clark, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. I can see that you've learned something important today, and that's what counts." 6 months later, Madison had returned to New York as a completely changed person. She had started a foundation to support military veterans using her family's wealth to help heroes like James Thompson. The videos of her encounter with the Royal Guard had indeed gone viral, but instead of hiding from them, she used them as teaching moments in schools and community centers. She often told audiences about the day she met a true hero, and nearly missed it because she was too focused on her own importance to recognize greatness in others. The story of her encounter with Lance Corporal James Thompson, Victoria Cross recipient, became a powerful lesson about respect, humility, and the danger of judging people by appearances. James continued his service with the Queen's Guard, his Victoria Cross a visible reminder of his extraordinary courage. But those who knew him said the decoration hadn't changed him at all. He remained the same humble, dedicated soldier who simply wanted to serve his country with honor. Detective Inspector Mitchell often walked past Buckingham Palace during her lunch breaks, always pausing to nod respectfully at whichever guard was on duty. She never forgot the lesson she learned that day about the extraordinary people who serve in ordinary-looking roles. The encounter between an entitled American tourist and a British Royal Guard had become legendary, shared around the world, as a reminder that true worth comes from character and service, not wealth and privilege. It was a story that changed everyone who heard it, just as it had changed Madison Clark on that unforgettable autumn day in London.